HOA diverted my spring. So I let their splash pad sit bone dry all summer. What happens when an HOA diverts a private spring for its own use? And why would that decision leave their splash pad completely dry through the summer? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am glad you are here for another neighborhood justice story. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching, supporting the channel, and continuing to spend your time with us. Your support truly means a lot. Before we get started, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Let's begin the story. Turn that pump off. The low electric hum did not belong in my spring, and I knew it before I even reached the bottom of the hill. It was 6:30 on a cool western North Carolina morning. Wet leaves sticking to my boots, cold mist hanging between the hardwoods, and the smell of fresh-cut soil rising from a trench that had not been there the day before. Water clicked against the old stone spring box while a new black polyethylene line disappeared uphill through torn ground. Todd Nolan stood beside a portable pump with one hand on the control housing. Rebecca Caldwell was 10 feet away holding a folded utility sketch, clean boots already muddy around the edges. She looked at me like I had interrupted scheduled maintenance. "Owen, we are reopening an existing water supply." I stopped beside the brass survey disc set into the ground near the spring box. Existing supply to who? Cedar Brook Estates. That was not my question. Todd took his hand off the pump controls. The motor kept running, drawing water from the stone box with a steady mechanical vibration I could feel through the wet soil. My name is Owen Mercer. I was 49 years old, and my family had owned 24 acres outside Asheville long before Cedar Brook had sidewalks, ornamental stone walls, or a homeowners association president who carried utility plans in a leather folder. I had spent most of my adult life building and repairing spring systems, wells, pumps, storage tanks, and rural water lines. I knew the difference between an old pipe and an active right to use it. Rebecca pointed toward a faded green irrigation line half buried beside the spring. The developer used this connection for years. Years ago. It is still here. So is that stone box. You do not own that either. Her expression tightened. We are not taking ownership of anything. We are restoring historic access. I crouched beside the spring box and looked at the intake Todd had installed. Fresh clamps. New black line. Clean fittings. The old green pipe was still there, cracked with age and stained from years underground. Someone had uncovered it, followed its route, and decided its existence answered every legal question that should have come before the shovel. Who authorized you to trench on my parcel? I asked. Rebecca unfolded the sketch. This line serves Cedar Brook. That does not answer the question. She pointed uphill. The connection has always been part of the community infrastructure. I looked down at the brass survey disc beside my boot. Community infrastructure does not move property lines. Todd shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca ignored him. Owen, nobody is harming your spring. It is still flowing. I leaned over the stone box and pulled out the notched measuring stick I kept tucked beneath the cover. The water sat lower than my last reading. Not dramatically lower. Enough to notice. Enough to record. I photographed the level, the pump, the black line, the old green pipe, the trench, and the survey disc. Rebecca watched me. You are documenting a temporary connection? I am documenting a new intake on my land. For an existing system. That depends on what you mean by existing. She folded the sketch again. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. I stood and looked at the black pipe disappearing uphill through the trees. Where exactly are you sending my water? Rebecca hesitated for half a second. Cedar Brook. That is still not an answer. The pump hummed between us. Cold water slid across the stone lip and into the branch below. Rebecca had found an old pipe and decided it proved an old right. I was beginning to suspect the most important thing about that pipe was not where it went, but why anyone had ever been allowed to use it in the first place. The spring had been there before Cedar Brook Estates had roads, stone mailboxes, or even a survey plat. My grandfather used to clear leaves from the channel with a garden rake and tell me the coldest water on the property came straight out of that hillside. By the time I was old enough to help, the spring box was already weathered smooth around the top stones, dark with moss on the north side, and cool enough inside that summer air felt different when you lifted the cover. For things around that spot had always mattered to me. The stone spring box, the brass survey disc set into the ground uphill from it, the notch measuring stick I used to track seasonal water level, and the faded green irrigation line that disappeared beneath the leaves like something the woods had been trying to forget. The green pipe was the only part that did not belong to my family's original system. It had been installed years earlier when Cedar Brook was still under construction. Back then, developers were grading roads, planting entrance landscaping, and trying to keep fresh sod alive through a dry summer. They had asked for temporary access to water from the spring. My father agreed under a written arrangement I had never needed to think much about after the development phase ended. The pipe remained in the ground because removing hundreds of feet of buried line would have disturbed more hillside than leaving it alone. It had not carried active water in years. Rebecca saw an old connection. I saw an abandoned reminder of a temporary favor. The morning after I found Todd's new pump, I went back down the hill before sunrise with my notebook, camera, and measuring stick. The woods were quiet except for water moving over stone and a woodpecker somewhere across the ravine. The new black line was still there, running beside the old green pipe before climbing toward Cedar Brook. Fresh trench soil had started drying along the edges. I slid the notched stick into the spring box and recorded the level. Then I walked downstream to the small wooden footbridge near the lower meadow. Normally, even in dry weather, I could hear the branch before I stepped onto the boards. That morning the sound was softer. Still flowing. Still clear. Just less. I crouched beside the channel and watched the current move around a flat gray rock I had used as a reference for years. More of the rock was exposed than usual. I photographed it and wrote down the time. Nothing dramatic. No dried creek. No dead vegetation. Just a measurable change after somebody added a pump. That distinction mattered. I had spent too many years working on springs and wells to confuse observation with proof. One reading was a note. 2 was a pattern starting. A week was evidence worth comparing. I walked back uphill and checked the brass survey disc. The fresh trench crossed several feet inside my property boundary before reaching the new intake. Whoever had installed it had not wandered onto my land by accident. They had followed the old green line straight to the spring box because they believed the pipe gave them permission. I brushed damp soil off the brass disc and took another photograph. Then I looked at the 2 lines lying side by side. One faded green from years ago, one black and new. Same direction. Completely different assumptions behind them. Rebecca thought the old pipe connected Cedar Brook to my spring. I was starting to wonder whether it connected her to an agreement she had never bothered to read. Rebecca finally told me where the water was going 2 days later, and once she did, the whole project made more sense. Cedar Brook Estates had spent the better part of a year advertising a new splash pad beside the clubhouse. Bright blue concrete, stainless spray arches, shade structures, benches, a control cabinet mounted behind a decorative fence. Rebecca had called it the centerpiece of the summer amenity package at every board meeting, open house, and sales event she could turn into a brochure. The concrete was already poured. The spray fixtures were installed. The landscaping around it was nearly finished. What was not finished was the water service. I learned that from Todd Nolan when I found him near the upper end of the new black line with a trenching machine parked beside him. Municipal connection got expensive, he said before Rebecca arrived. How expensive? More than they budgeted. So somebody decided my spring was cheaper. Todd rubbed dirt from his glove. There was already a line. I looked at him. An old irrigation line. That is what Rebecca said. Did anyone show you a current water agreement? He did not answer. That told me enough. Rebecca came down the slope carrying a folder and wearing the expression she used whenever she expected a conversation to end with her decision intact. Owen, I thought we settled this. You never answered where the new line terminates. At the splash pad system. There it was. I looked uphill towards Cedar Brook, where the clubhouse roof was barely visible through the trees. You are using my spring as makeup water for a recreational system? We are using an existing community connection. No, you are using a new pump on an old line. The developer used this source for years. For what? She hesitated. Landscape irrigation. Exactly. Rebecca opened the folder and pulled out a cost estimate. The municipal upgrade requires a larger meter, new service work, backflow protection, and additional connection fees. It is wasteful when a functioning source already exists. Functioning is not the same as authorized. The water has been coming out of that hill longer than either of us has been here. And that somehow makes it Cedar Brook property? Her patience thinned. You keep turning a practical solution into a property lecture. Because the practical solution starts on my parcel. She pointed toward the old, faded green pipe. That line proved Cedarbrook had access. Had. You are arguing over one word. It is usually the important word. Todd looked away. Rebecca folded the estimate back into her folder. The board approved the splash pad based on reasonable operating costs. Running a completely new municipal supply would push the project well over budget. Then the board approved a project before it secured its water source. We already had a source. You had a pipe. She stared at me. This amenity serves the entire community. That does not change who owns the spring. She took one step closer to the trench. The system needs water. Your spring produces water. The connection already exists. Why would we pay for another one? That sentence explained everything. Rebecca did not think she was stealing water. She thought she had discovered savings buried under the hill. To her, the old green pipe was proof that somebody before her had already solved the problem. To me, it was proof that somebody before her had asked permission. I looked toward the clubhouse again and imagined the finished splash pad under summer heat. All those polished spray nozzles depending on a water source nobody had bothered to verify. Rebecca had not discovered free water. She had discovered water she had never budgeted to replace. The first full pump test gave me the number Rebecca did not want to talk about. 3 inches. That was how far the water level in the stone spring box dropped between my morning reading and the afternoon reading, while Todd's new pump ran uphill toward Cedarbrook. I checked it twice because 1 measurement can become an argument and 2 can become a record. At 7:10 that morning, the notched measuring stick showed the water sitting exactly where I expected for late spring. By 1:30, after several hours of pumping, the mark was 3 inches lower. The spring was still flowing. Rebecca made sure to point that out when she arrived with Todd. It is not dry, she said. I never said it was. Then I do not understand the problem. I held up the measuring stick. You changed the draw. She glanced at the notches. 3 inches. 3 inches in the box during a test period. That sounds minor. It sounds measurable. Todd shifted his weight beside the pump. The motor hummed steadily, drawing through the new black line. I walked downstream to the small wooden footbridge and stood over the branch. The water still moved under it, clear over gravel, but the current had thinned enough that more of the flat gray rock near the bank was exposed. I photographed it from the same angle as my earlier baseline. Then I took a short video of the flow, recorded the time, and wrote down the pump model, pipe diameter, and test duration. Rebecca watched me. You are making this look like an environmental investigation. No, I am documenting what changed after you installed equipment on my property. The spring is still healthy. That is not what I am measuring. I went back uphill and photographed the intake connection, the fresh trench, the pump housing, the old faded green line, and the brass survey disc. I had already called Kevin Brooks, a licensed land surveyor I trusted, and he arrived before 3 with a field tablet and survey equipment. Rebecca did not look pleased when she saw him. Why is a surveyor here? Because you keep calling this community infrastructure. Kevin located the brass disc, tied it into the recorded parcel corners, and walked the trench alignment from the spring box toward the upper slope. He marked several points electronically, then stopped beside the pump. This entire intake setup is inside the Mercer parcel, he said. Rebecca crossed her arms. The line serves Cedarbrook. Kevin looked at her. I am only telling you where it sits. And the old pipe? Also originates inside this parcel. He returned to his field tablet. No lecture. No opinion. Just location. That was the difference between Rebecca and the people I trusted around infrastructure. She started with the result she wanted and worked backward. Kevin started with a point in the ground and measured from there. By late afternoon, I had a clean chain of evidence. Morning water level. Afternoon water level. Reduced downstream flow. New pump. New black line. Fresh trench. Surveyed property position. Rebecca still had the same answer for all of it. The spring is still flowing. I looked at the measuring stick again. That was never the question. She frowned. Then what is? I pointed toward the black line climbing the hill. Whether you had the right to take any of it in the first place. The answer was buried in a county file under a title so ordinary that Rebecca probably would have skipped past it. Sarah Whitman found it 2 days after Kevin Brooks finished the survey. She was a property attorney I had worked with before on a right-of-way question, and she had the kind of patience old land records demanded. When I walked into her office, She already had a scanned copy of the agreement open beside my survey photographs. "Owen," she said, "I found the document that explains the green pipe." I sat down. "What does it say?" First, read the title. Temporary Landscape Water Use License. I looked at the words again. Temporary. Landscape. Water Use. License. Sarah turned the page toward me. Those 4 words do most of the work. The agreement had been signed during Cedar Brook's development phase, years before Rebecca ever became Homeowners Association president. My father had allowed the developer to draw a limited amount of spring water for establishment irrigation while new sod, trees, and entrance landscaping were being installed. The license described a maximum daily volume, a defined route for the green irrigation line, and a termination point tied to the end of the development period. Sarah ran her finger down the paragraph slowly. Here, no transfer of ownership, no permanent water easement, no recreational use, no indefinite right. And the expiration? Long gone. I leaned back and thought about the faded green pipe lying in the leaves beside the spring box. Rebecca had been pointing to it like physical proof that Cedar Brook owned access forever. The document said almost the opposite. The pipe existed because somebody had asked permission. The permission had limits. Then it ended. Sarah pulled Kevin's survey closer. The intake Todd installed is entirely inside your parcel. The new pump sits inside your parcel. The trench starts inside your parcel. And the only recorded water use document I found does not authorize what they are doing now. So Cedar Brook never owned the spring. Correct. They just had permission to use some of it. For a specific purpose and a specific period. I smiled without meaning to. Which word do you think Rebecca missed first? Sarah looked at the title. Temporary would be my guess. I handed her the photographs of the new black line, the pump, and my notched measuring stick showing the 3-inch drop during the test. She keeps saying the spring is still flowing. That is not the legal question. Exactly. Sarah nodded. The question is whether they have a current right to divert water for this new purpose. She drafted a formal notice while I sat there. It demanded that Cedar Brook stop drawing from the spring, remove the unauthorized intake and pump from my property, restore the disturbed area, and provide any document they believe created a present right to use the source. The tone was calm. No threats. No accusations. Just ownership, survey location, expired license, and a request for proof. We sent it by certified mail and electronic mail that afternoon. Rebecca responded before dinner. Her message said the Homeowners Association considered the spring connection a continuation of historic community access, and that removing it would unnecessarily interfere with an important summer amenity. Sarah forwarded the message back to me with one sentence. She did not identify a current water right. I printed Rebecca's reply and laid it beside the old license on my workbench. The contrast was almost too clean. Her electronic mail said historic access. The recorded document said temporary license. Her new black pipe depended on an old green one. The old green one depended on permission. And unlike the pipe, the permission had expired years ago. The drawing that finally stopped Rebecca from calling the spring a community connection had one blue line on it. Sarah Whitman found the approved splash pad plan in the county file and asked me to meet her at Cedar Brook the next morning with Dr. Miles Bennett, the hydrologist she had contacted to review my spring measurements. We spread the plan across a folding table beside the clubhouse while early sun flashed off the stainless spray arches. The splash pad looked finished. Bright blue concrete, yellow spray posts, red buckets, a clean control cabinet behind a decorative fence. Everything ready except the one thing Rebecca had been trying to take from my hillside. Sarah pointed to the blue line printed along the utility sheet. It ran from the municipal service connection to the splash pad balance tank. No branch toward my property. No spring intake. No old green irrigation pipe. No new black line. This is the approved makeup water source, she said. Municipal potable water service. Miles traced the line with one finger, then compared it to the photographs I had taken of Todd's pump and trench. The installed source does not match this drawing. Rebecca arrived while we were still looking at the plan. She carried the same leather folder and the same expression she had worn at the spring. Why are you reviewing construction documents without the board? Sarah answered calmly. Because the water source installed on Owen's property does not appear on the approved plan. Rebecca looked at the blue line. The municipal connection was the original concept. We used an existing source instead. Was the source change reviewed? Sarah asked. It did not change the splash pad equipment. It changed what supplies the equipment. Rebecca started to answer, but a county vehicle pulled into the lot before she could. Laura Hayes stepped out carrying a clipboard and a rolled plan set. She handled recreational water inspections for the county, and unlike the rest of us, she had no stake in who owned which argument. She introduced herself, opened the approved drawings, and started asking questions. Where is the installed water source? Rebecca pointed downhill. A private spring connection historically used by Cedar Brook. Laura looked at the plan. Show me where that source is approved here. Silence. Rebecca pointed to a note about makeup water. The system has a makeup water requirement. Yes, from the approved source. Laura looked at me. Is the spring on your parcel? Yes. Is there a current agreement authorizing recreational use? Sarah handed her the temporary landscape water use license. Laura read the title, then the expiration language. This is for landscape irrigation during development. Correct, Sarah said. Laura turned back to Rebecca. Was a source substitution submitted? We believe the historic connection remained valid. That is a property issue. I am asking about the facility approval. Rebecca's face tightened. No separate substitution was submitted. Laura nodded and wrote something down. Then the installed supply does not match the approved plan. Rebecca folded her arms. The spring water is clean. Miles spoke for the first time. Nobody here has concluded otherwise. Laura nodded. This is not a statement about the spring being unsafe. It is about an unreviewed source change. Different sources can require different testing, treatment, cross-connection review, and operating conditions. You cannot substitute one and open the facility as if nothing changed. The clubhouse lawn was quiet behind us. Beyond the fence, every spray nozzle stood polished and dry. Rebecca looked at the plan again. So what are you requiring? Laura answered without drama. Disconnect the unauthorized spring source, restore the system to the approved municipal supply, complete the required connection and backflow work, then schedule inspection before operation. And until then, the splash pad does not open. Rebecca stared at the single blue line running across the page. For weeks, she had argued about history, pipes, community benefit, and water still flowing from my spring. None of that changed the drawing. Her splash pad had concrete, controls, tanks, spray arches, landscaping, and a summer opening date. What it did not have was the one water source the approved plan actually required. The easiest way out was sitting in front of Rebecca the next morning, and she still refused to take it. Sarah Whitman drafted a short corrective proposal and sent it to the Cedar Brook board before breakfast. Remove the new black intake from my spring. Restore the stone spring box and disturbed hillside. Complete the municipal service shown on the approved splash pad plan. Install the required meter and backflow protection. Schedule county inspection. Open the amenity after approval. Nothing in the proposal asked Cedar Brook to abandon the splash pad. Nobody was trying to keep it closed. The board only had to finish the project using the water source it had originally submitted. I met Rebecca near the clubhouse that afternoon. The splash pad sat behind the decorative fence under bright late May sun. Blue concrete, almost painful to look at in the glare. You have a clean path, I told her. Use the municipal connection. She held Sarah's letter between two fingers. At an unnecessary cost. It was the cost on your approved plan. Before we confirmed historic spring access, you confirmed an old pipe. We confirmed years of use. Under a temporary landscape license. Her expression tightened. You keep repeating that word like it changes the physical connection. It changes the permission behind it. Rebecca looked through the fence toward the dry spray arches. Residents were promised a Memorial Day opening. Then finish the approved water service. That could take weeks. That is not my decision. You know this will make the board look incompetent. I did not install a new pump on somebody else's land. She lowered her voice. Owen, be reasonable. Let us operate for the summer while the legal question gets sorted out. The county already answered the operating question. The county answered the drawing question. Same result. She stared at me for a moment, then folded the letter. Cedar Brook will continue exercising its historic spring access. Put that in writing. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because every time you say something important, the paperwork eventually matters. The electronic mail arrived that evening. The board, Rebecca wrote, considered the historic use of the spring sufficient to support continued access and objected to any demand that the connection be abandoned. Sarah forwarded the message to Laura Hayes and replied with a single request. Identify the current recorded right authorizing recreational use of the spring. Rebecca did not produce one. The next day, Todd Nolan shut down the new pump under the county correction notice. I stood beside the stone spring box while he disconnected the black intake. He did not argue. I install what I am hired to install, he said. Next time asked to see the water right. He gave me a tired look. Next time I will. The old faded green pipe stayed where it had always been, half buried beneath leaves. The new black line was capped and removed from the spring area, pending final restoration. My measuring stick showed the water level beginning to return toward its normal seasonal mark. Under the wooden footbridge, the branch sounded stronger again. Memorial Day came 3 days later. Cedar Brook hung banners near the clubhouse announcing summer fun starts here. The splash pad gate stayed locked. No spray. No pump noise. No water running across the blue concrete. Rebecca told residents the opening had been delayed by unexpected permitting complications. Sarah showed me the notice and said nothing. She did not need to. By the first week of June, the municipal connection estimate was still sitting in front of the board. Rebecca had every legal way to get water to the splash pad. She just did not have the free one she had counted on. By the middle of July, the driest thing in Cedar Brook Estates was painted bright blue. The splash pad sat behind its decorative fence under 90-degree afternoons, every stainless nozzle polished, every red bucket clean, every yellow spray arch waiting for water that never came. Heat shimmered above the concrete. The control cabinet stayed closed. The drain stayed dry. No children were being turned away from an operating facility because the facility had never been approved to open. It was simply there, finished enough to photograph and useless enough to become impossible to ignore. Rebecca kept calling the delay temporary. June passed. Then the 4th of July passed. Then another 2 weeks. Residents started asking why a project advertised for summer still had no opening date. At first, the Homeowners Association newsletters blamed permitting, then inspection scheduling, then utility coordination. The explanations grew longer while the splash pad remained exactly the same. I did not post anything online. I did not attend board meetings to embarrass anyone. I kept working on my own property. The stone spring box had settled back into its normal rhythm. My notched measuring stick showed a seasonal level within the range I had recorded in previous summers. The small branch under the wooden footbridge carried a steady, clear flow again. Todd Nolan returned once to finish restoring the disturbed hillside, removing the remaining section of new black line near the intake and stabilizing the trench with seed and erosion control matting. The old faded green pipe remained half buried under leaves, disconnected and quiet. One afternoon, Megan Pierce, the Homeowners Association treasurer, called me. Owen, I need to ask you something about the municipal connection. What about it? Was it always part of the approved splash pad plan? Yes. Before Rebecca tried to use your spring? Yes. She was quiet. Do you know why it was not included in the final project budget? You need to ask Rebecca. 2 days later, Megan asked me to attend a board document review with Sarah Whitman present. Rebecca was already there when we arrived, sitting beside a stack of invoices and construction records. Megan had 2 folders open. The first contained the expired temporary landscape water use license. The second contained the current approved splash pad utility plan. She tapped the old license. This ended years ago. Sarah nodded. Then Megan tapped the blue municipal supply line on the approved drawing. And this was the water source approved for the splash pad. Correct, Laura Hayes said from the other end of the table. Rebecca leaned forward. The project team believed historic spring access would reduce operating costs. Megan looked at her. Reduce operating costs or avoid the connection cost? Rebecca did not answer immediately. That pause changed the room. Megan pulled out the original municipal service estimate. Larger meter. Service upgrade. Backflow device. Connection fee. Inspection. The amount was significant, but it had existed before construction began. This was never budgeted, Megan said. Rebecca replied, because we expected to use the existing spring connection. Sarah placed the expired license beside the estimate. You expected to use a source Cedar Brook no longer had permission to use. Rebecca looked toward me, and Owen refused to cooperate. I shook my head. I refused to give away a spring because your budget assumed it was free. Laura spoke before Rebecca could answer. The county also required the installed water source to match an approved plan. That issue would exist regardless of the property dispute. Megan sat back. 2 folders. That was all it took. One showed the spring permission had ended. The other showed municipal water had been required from the beginning. By August, the board finally understood why the splash pad was still silent. The concrete was not dry because I had shut anything off. It was dry because Rebecca had built an amenity around a water source she did not own, then refused to pay for the one her own approved drawing required. Labor Day came with the same bright blue concrete and the same dry spray nozzles. Cedar Brook Estates had gone through an entire summer without opening the splash pad, not because anybody had sabotaged it, but because the board had finally run out of ways to pretend an expired permission was a permanent water source. By then, Todd Nolan had finished restoring the disturbed hillside on my property. The new black intake line was gone. The trench had been stabilized. The stone spring box sat quiet beneath the hardwoods again, cool water collecting at the same seasonal level I had recorded for years. I slid the notched measuring stick into the box one September morning and watched the surface settle near the old mark. Under the wooden footbridge, the branch carried a clear, steady trickle over gravel. No pump hum, no fresh trench, no utility crew, just water going where it had always gone. Cedar Brook eventually approved the municipal connection for the following season. The new budget included the larger meter, service upgrade, backflow protection, connection fees, inspection, and the work Rebecca had tried to avoid from the beginning. Megan Pierce sent Sarah Whitman a copy of the board resolution, mostly because it also included a new requirement that any future project involving off-site utilities, private property, water sources, drainage connections, or shared infrastructure had to be reviewed against recorded agreements before construction money was spent. That part mattered more to me than the splash pad itself. A bad assumption had started with one faded green pipe. The board wanted to make sure the next one stopped at the paperwork stage. Rebecca stayed in office for several more weeks, but the document review had changed how residents saw the project. They learned the municipal supply had been on the approved plan from the start. They learned the spring license had expired years earlier. They learned the new intake had been installed on land Cedar Brook did not own. They also learned I had never shut down an operating public amenity, never cut a line, never damaged a pump, and never prevented the association from using the lawful water connection available to it. At the special election that fall, Rebecca lost the presidency. I did not attend. Megan called me afterward and said the vote was not close. I thanked her, hung up, and went back to replacing a pressure switch on a well system 15 miles away. That was enough politics for me. A few days later, Sarah returned the original copies of my property records. Inside the folder were photographs of the stone spring box, the brass survey disc, the measuring stick, the old faded green irrigation pipe, and the section of new black line Todd had removed. I kept the photographs and the expired license together, not as a trophy, as a reminder. The old pipe had once represented permission. The new pipe had represented assumption. The difference between them was not visible in the plastic. It was written in the agreement. By October, leaves had started gathering around the spring box again. I brushed them from the stone cover and stood there listening to water move beneath it. Up the hill, Cedar Brook's splash pad was closed for the season exactly as it had been all summer. Next year, if the new board finished the municipal connection and passed inspection, it would probably open without anybody ever thinking about my spring again. That suited me fine. Rebecca saw water coming out of the ground and called it free. The county saw a supply line. The deed saw my land. And the old agreement saw a permission that had already ended.